Well, hello everyone. Good morning. It's hard to believe we made it to our last session, and genuinely, I've enjoyed every session I've attended. There's been so many wonderful presentations, and I think we've all been really honored to be part of this. So, we are the Stack Collective, and we're here to present the welcome problem, centering the ends to develop the means in art education, which impacts who we are as a collective and our emerging contributions to the field of art education. As a group, we have broad competencies teaching across the arts and came to teaching through our art practices. We're all artists first, but we've ended up in so many different places like community sites. Some of us do teacher training, post-secondary studio, high school, and museum and gallery education. And we're practice focused, which means that we'll address theory and we'll allude to theory in education, but we're only interested in theory so far as it helps to cultivate our practices as artists and teachers, as a collective, I should say. And we aim to create resources for teachers looking to find new ways to teach concepts and methods in the art classroom. And so STACK stands for the Shortcuts for Teachers Artist Collective. And we chose STACK because artists tend to love collectives, and education people love acronyms. So we think there should be some grant money to follow, right? So STACK formed because we were frustrated with conventional ways of teaching certain kinds of arts methods. We noticed from our own teaching and learning that there were certain exercises and approaches associated with key concepts in art education. Upon reflection, we realized that there were many facets of how we thought art education functioned that we were taking for granted. This, as Nancy and I noted, is often echoed in our teacher trainees, who were often going back to what they were taught and how they were taught certain concepts rather than reflecting on the efficacy of those concepts. And so, for example, to foreshadow what I'll elaborate on later, often painters learn about value and color by painting grayscales and value charts on paper. But as I'll elaborate on a little bit more, this is often a needlessly tedious practice that, as I can reflect back now as a practicing artist and as a teacher, had nothing to do with my actual understanding of how value and color work in practice and how we can use these things in practice. So a shortcut then is a pedagogical device that makes evident to the learner that which might take weeks, months, or years of prolonged engagement to comprehend organically. Rather than it being a shortcut around the work required to master a competency, we are interested in shortcuts that reveal key concepts and methods in artistic practice. We aren't trying to circumvent the learning. We are trying to make evident where we want students to go and what we want them to learn. So some of the facets, some of the tenets of the things that we've developed come from a problem-posing approach to studio pedagogy. We're really interested in those problems that our students encounter, the problems that we as artists encounter, and we try not to take an authoritative role. Rather, we try to take a demonstrative role and welcome people to interpret our exercises and frameworks as they see fit. We often engage our students with dialogue in a number of different ways, but we really want to understand where our students are coming from and what parts of our teaching might not be landing in the ways that we hope. And finally, we really value making intelligible, difficult concepts, and to borrow a phrase from Bell Hooks, teaching so that everyone can learn. And because we're in so many different concepts, often we have to be really economical with the time we have. We can't count on our students and community putting in 8 hours of homework to grasp something, and we don't think it's particularly helpful to frustrate our students in university or post-secondary settings either with needlessly tedious exercises. The second is backward design, which is the process of really figuring out where you want your students to end up with a technology, or with a competency, I should say, and scaffolding backward. Developing activities and assignments with the success of the students in mind, rather than sort of doing what we were used to try to hope that students grasp the competency in general. And well, related to our aims, a lot of backward design is really focused on rethinking evaluation, and we have to do that as teachers, but it's not really part of the ways we're thinking about art teaching together. And I'll pass it off to Regina.
And so just to add on to that, for us, rather than backwards design, what was more interesting to us was visual thinking. And so they will touch on this too, but Bree and I specifically, we're interested in using contemporary artists and works to kind of show the students examples of folks that have gone through the journey as they kind of learn in the course. And going back to the idea of confidence, so moving away from romanticized ideas of the artists, the genius artists, and works that are very rooted in traditional ways of thinking, and humanizing the artist by allowing students to make mistakes. So creating that open space and safe space for them to grow and get agency. And problem-based learning is also what the three of us are interested in that we're moving away from traditional learning, which is, typically students are given the information, maybe through a lecture style, and the students are asked to memorize information, or in the arts case, maybe replicate a traditional painting, for example, and students are assigned the problem, again, to apply the information. But problem-based learning, we're interested in assigning the problem first so that they have agency to create their own answers based on their lived experiences, as well as once they apply it, they can really make their piece their own, and they can be proud of it. And so taking all these theories and concepts, we as SAC came up with a problem model, which is to first identify a problem in our own teaching and art practice, demonstrate the problem to the students, and then have the students create a shortcut to the problem, and then confirm the shortcut by going back to the problem.
And just to elaborate that on a little bit further, when we identify a problem in our teaching and art practice, we're trying to think about what is the thing that we're struggling with right now as an artist in our art careers? What did we struggle with when we were students? What are some things that we notice our students are struggling with now as they go on to higher levels? Or what did we think about were the gaps when we transitioned from the institution to our art practices that we wish we were told in the first place? When we demonstrate the problem, we're making it real, visible, and understandable. So how can we do this by showing them, by telling them stories, by giving them examples of contemporary artists and their journey? Going back to what Jeannie was saying, it's not the genius artist always who's born that way. There was a journey and steps that they took to get to that point. The shortcut to the problem is clearly presented as an active shortcut, and this could be a lesson plan for the day. It could be a structure for the course. With the community center, we really had the freedom to create courses for things that we saw and problems that we saw in the community. So we used that. Did it work for us? Does it work for other artists? How will it work? And importantly, what to do if it doesn't work right away? When we confirm the shortcut, we go back to the problem. We say, how did these actions that we took prepare you for the problem? How did this work even if it wasn't successful yet? Because now you're aware of the problem and can work towards it. And we always take time as a class to reflect on what it is that we learned. For daily art practice, this is the course that I teach at the community center. The original problem was a need to make more artwork in one's practice and to engage with a community of artists. We needed accountability and less stress to just try different things and be able to dive into something that we were interested in. And so the answer to that was a course which established students being accountable to their practices by coming to class and seeing their community every week for 8 weeks, and creating 80 original artworks that they could develop in the future with a 30-minute, 3-minute output that happened at the beginning of every single class. It stepped away from the preciousness of a perfect idea because it was rapid making, and it allowed for experimentation, novelty, and overlap. In fact, it was rewarded and encouraged on a weekly basis. For me, as an artist, it took many years for me to understand, which is crazy, but to understand how important it was to understand the broader art community, how important it was to be on the pulse of artists and what they were making right here, right now, and also abroad. And so I went to the Venice Biennale, which is a show that happens every 2 years in Venice that hosts artists from across the globe, representing their different countries and selected by a curator who picks a theme of contemporary art relevance to host all of these different artists with. And so I went there and I found myself with a new problem. It was so quick. We had like 1 day for each of the pavilions. We looked at tons of art. There were a lot of people. And I felt like I didn't really absorb much in the experience other than a bunch of really cool pictures. But I was curious, what are these contemporary artworks of today? Who are these local artists? What were their works about, and how did they make it to this point? How did they make it to the Biennale representing their country? And so I found this new problem was a great opportunity for a new course. The new problem was a lack of familiarity with global artists and artistic concepts of relevance from the Venice Biennale 2022 exhibition, The Milk of Dreams. So I created this course, which used the old formula but added in the Milk of Dreams artists. The shortcut to the problem was every single week we would take 4 of the concepts that were used by the curators, Cecilia Almani, and we would dive into artists that were really representing those different concepts. Her 4 questions were, how is the definition of a human being changing? What differentiates plants and animals, humans and non-humans? What are our responsibilities towards our planet, other beings, and other forms of life? And what would life look like without us? And so all of these artists have some sort of tether or multiple tethers to these different themes, and we wanted to break that down in this course. The new format was such that we would do our 30-minute, 3-minute drawings, so still building up that practice, but now every single week we would dive into one of those questions and present 5 artists about that theme, talking about what they did, what their approach was, where they were from, what kind of materials they used, and what was innovative about their practices. By the end, it meant that the students had 40 new artists from across the globe that they were somewhat familiar with. They were introduced to many different ways of making and many different approaches and themes from all these different perspectives, even just a little bit, as a foot in the door to explore it further. Students were encouraged to create works that associated with their personal art practices. How could they have an individual voice too? And by seeing all of these different individualities, how could they start to identify their own? We would use Padlet to talk about these works and show progress and show tests, and people were often rewarded with thinking outside the box. To confirm the shortcut by going back to the problem, at the end of every daily art practice course, I do a VR exhibition with a program called Art Steps, where we take, if it's a little sketch or if it's a thorough work, we put it up in this gallery, it's blown up really huge, it looks super professional. We dress up in our homes on Zoom, and we do a virtual vernissage. We talk about how successful it was, how far did we go, what new and interesting individual things were teased out of the class. And in this case as well, for this class, I asked them, how can you go into your community and see more artists and experience more ways of seeing and making artwork? And I'll pass it now to you.
So I just want to start my problem, I suppose, with a simple question. What color are the walls in this room? Just shout it out.
White.
White, yeah. But what color is this wall over here? Sorry. Tangerine. Well, I was thinking more about the white wall. So if we let me phrase it a different way. If we go to Canadian Tire and we take a paint chip of this, they shoot the laser through it, they'll give us this color white every time. But how can we compare the white seen on this wall with the white seen on that wall? What's different about it?
It's the light.
The light, exactly. And so this demonstrates one of the key problems when teaching people how to paint is that there's simultaneously 2 color wheels hitting everything at once. There's the material color wheel, like I like to call it, and there's the color wheel of light. And so when I'm teaching painting, the thing I'm trying to get people to learn is to be able to see a color and to mix a color. Now, the problem with color is that we have so many labels related to it. So you look at something, you see white, and you'll probably, if you're a first-time painter, you've never engaged with art before, you'll reach for the titanium white, you'll put it on the canvas, and it's not going to work, right? So what I try to do to demonstrate this problem is I'll show students some examples, and this is a very common one. People painting the white of the eye with the white out of the tube, and it just shoots out from the painting, right? Or wanting to paint the blue sky and just grabbing the blue from the tube. Now these can be stylistic choices that I fully support, but if you're trying to learn to paint from observation, seeing color and seeing that every color has a value is critical to our endeavor as observational painters. So an exercise I like to do is I'll grab a pack of oil pastels, 50 colors, and I'll put students in groups of 3 or 4, and I'll have them organize them not by color, but from light to dark. So often it's easy because there's a white and there's a dark, but everything in between is this contest that sometimes takes 20 minutes to have people even come to a consensus, right? And then what I'll do is I'll actually, you can go on Amazon and purchase everything now, but these red lights for, they're LED lights that I can set to a certain kind of red, and all you see is the value in the room. So I block out all the lights, I put all the curtains down, often I'm getting big blankets to make sure the windows are really sealed tight. And we can look, and students can see where they made mistakes and where, oh, this color is actually not as dark as that color, and this color is not as dark as that color. And then we paint. We actually use the red light to paint a colorful still life. And students are they have their full palette with them, but they're only able to see, the values on their canvas and on their palette. And what this leads to is some really exciting and interesting color choices. But students are also, shown that when they see value, they're actually sort of treated to this liberty that they can start to take with color. So maybe it's not a white wall. First of all, we can get more specific. This is sort of if I'm mixing this with my paint, I'm looking at this ultramarine, probably a bit of burnt umber and, lots of titanium white. But we can also make some exciting choices, like over here on top of a big Lego brick, that red. I would never think to do that unless I had this demonstrated to me. So it doesn't solve the problem of helping students learn to mix colors and values, but it demonstrates that there's actually a lot of liberty that can be made as artists if we sort of learn these foundational concepts. And I notice always a huge difference in the paintings that are made after this exercise compared to the paintings that were made before. So I'll pass it off to Jeannie.
So what's really interesting is that right now we've heard from Bri, touching upon global perspectives, and Dave on a very technical skill. But for me, what I'm interested in is teaching to the broader community my knowledge of this very specific type of Korean traditional painting called chaekori, which translates to books and things. And so for me, I'm interested in how can I have the students, appreciate this cultural way of making, but without, going towards like cultural appropriation. And so for me, the solution was to make sure that they are, reflecting on what the artists went through during that time. And so what I did in the beginning was, introduce the idea of chaekori and presenting very traditional painters back in the 18th century, Joseon Dynasty, but then demonstrating that through my own practice. This was part of my master's thesis in art education, where I was interested in kind of embodying these practices that these painters went through back then, and then creating my own piece and how I can make that into an art education practice. And so by showing these students that even though that I have the knowledge of, these very traditional materials, it's okay if you are not, an expert at it. If you are interested in being inspired by these, very cultural and traditional ways of making too. Like anyone can make these kind of pieces if you have the resources and means. And so for me, as you can see here, this was made during the COVID pandemic, and I gave the example that for me, being connected to nature as well as reflecting on the objects that were important to me during that time was an important process. And these are the gifts that were given to me from friends. And so that's one of the many ways we can connect with students in a community setting. And then, I should have mentioned as well that this was part of a 5-week course I was teaching at Point St. Charles Art School virtually. And so at week 3, I was interested in introducing the artists to contemporary artists in South Korea that are still using this genre, but obviously in their own way, because there's no way that we can replicate 100% how they were making during that time using those very specific materials. And so you can see these artists, they were interested in, taking these stylistic matters and then making it their own, using very saturated colors for oil painting, as well as mural works, so that it can be accessible to a broader audience outside of the gallery white walls. And so taking all this knowledge, this very traditional way of thinking, as well as the contemporary approaches to this genre, the students were inspired to make their own pieces. And these are some of the examples. And you can see that they were using ready-made objects, for example, as well as collage and materials that there were some that they dabbled into new, but also kind of went into their own comfort zones, which was completely fine. And ultimately, this was their own way of making their shortcut to the problem because there's no one solution. And by doing that, I had them making sure at the end, at the 5 weeks, to reflect on their pieces. And by doing that, thinking about what this type of genre taught me, if anything. And I am hoping, although, it's not a solution, that they can take the knowledge that they've gained in this 5-week course and apply it to their everyday life, and that when they see cultural pieces in the future, that they can have their own reflection and instead of just facing it like surface level.
So in conclusion, the Stack Collective will be hosting these different diagrams and examples of our methods on our website as resources for teachers. We'll be putting some examples from our own practice, but also if you end up using these diagrams, we would love to also represent them on our site and make them openly accessible for all art practitioners and teachers in other realms as well. And whether it's developing a skill, building an art practice, or sharing a cultural practice, we hope that you enjoyed our presentation and will welcome the problem in your classrooms in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, folks. Second one as well, the conference. Thank you very much. Now we have Tony Costa. Tony's come from Portugal to present at the conference today, where he's from Lusofana University in Lisbon. And Tony's presentation is titled Cinematography and Film Studies. So,
thanks. Good morning, everyone.
Actually, Tony, if you could come here for a second, please.
Yep. Yeah, someone here.
Just want to get you in here.
Yep. You grab me?
Nope. not yet.
Yep.
There we go.
Yep. Yeah, well, thank you very much for coming. My presentation is a little bit different than the overall presentation here. It's really cinema that I'm talking about, and we're going to watch a movie for 9 minutes. So you should face yourselves really right in front of the screen, and we're going to have an experience like that one or this one. We think this is a darker area, but first I do a first presentation of the thesis. Does cinematography influence the perception of the viewer? Yeah, that's the question that we part on. And what is the cinematographer tasks? Because many people do not know what a cinematographer does. The cinematographer is the cameraman. There is a director for a movie, and then there's the cinematographer, the camera operator, that is going to light the scene, frame the scene, move the camera, establish the camera. So he is going to do his own task, his own contribution for the film. And it's not the director. And the relationship with the director is the director directs the actors, and the cinematographer places the camera in conjunction with the director. There are some directors that have a good visual view, that I like the camera over here, or I like this kind of lens, and I like this movement. Some of them do not know anything about it, so it's the cinematographer that has to do it. And some of them is just a sharing moment that they do, and they decide together. So lighting is the main work of the cinematographer. So the director doesn't direct any lighting. So the position of the light, where the light goes through, what colors, what shapes, that's what the cinematographer does. So does a camera placement, uses the equipment that is necessary for the movement, and creates mood and meaning. Mood. Look at this picture. You look at this picture over here, and you say, "Wow, that's a sunset there." Yeah, yes, there's a sunset, but it's a fake sunset. There was a light that is placed there. As you can see, it shapes all around there. If it was a sunset, it would be either from here or from the background. And this picture doesn't show it very well, but it's really a forecast day. It's cloudy day. But the cinematographer created a romantic mood by lighting in that place. And he placed the light artificially. And this one that you may know very well from The Godfather. So Gordon Willis, why his eyes are so dark? Because he is the Godfather, he couldn't have eye contact with you. So he was untouchable. So he was away from. So that's the light distance. So it's Gordon Willis show up. Another example of lighting, like the David Watkin in this film, The Devils. Look at this guy. This is really a terrible guy. You're just looking at it, right? It's just the light, but the way he looks at that. And then we have this one from Caleb Decker, from the Passion of Christ. Look at where the light is coming from. This is the moment when Christ is talking to God, and and look at the light is coming just vertically from the top. So that is an example. So that to create an impression to the audience. So this is all done by the cinematographer. And then there was an essay done for my PhD that I did, which was to have a scene where everything was the same, like the same director, the same set, the same actors, the same crew, and the shot with the same movie, the same film, the same piece, 3 times with 3 different cinematographers. And then to try to have the experience of what each cinematographer contributed for each of the films. So you're going to watch these 3 films. They're 3 minutes each. Okay, it's called One Film and 3 Visions. And this was necessary to separate the tasks of the cinematographer to the director. So we have the same director, directing the same actors, all with the same mise en scene, all the same set, everything is the same except the cinematographer. The cinematographer changes, and no one knew what the other one did. Okay, just came up, and the director gave the same instructions to each one of them. And the methodology to do this is the essay, which is the movie, a screening to a special focus groups that they answer the questionnaire, and then there's the results of this analysis. And the story strategy is just based on a poem of a French poet, Jacques Prévert, Déjeuner du matin, was written in 1947, but the director, Ilse Hoffmann, a German director, she decided to place this poem today, contemporary day, and gave a woman a different position than the poem. But the reason to choose was that there were no words, no dialogue, very much straightforward. This poem, very visually, a couple with an emotional relationship. So this is about 3 minutes that you're going to experience. So this was the way to isolate the function of the director. But how? But when these two work together, like director and cinematographer, they work together. And where is the boundary? Where is the frontier? Where is one ends up and another one begins? It's really difficult to establish that frontier. So what was decided was that each cinematographer would be free to place the camera. So play. We just turn the lights on, and then where?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, just place yourself well and go on. 9 minutes and I'll be back with you.
Oops.
Il a mis le café dans la tasse. Il a mis le lait dans la tasse de café. Il a mis le sucre dans le café au lait. Avec la petite cuillère, il a tourné. Il a bu le café au lait et il a reposé la tasse sans me parler. Il a allumé une cigarette. Il a fait le rond avec la fumée. Il a mis le centre dans le cendrier, sans me parler, sans me regarder. Il s'est levé. Il a mis son manteau de pluie parce qu'il pleuvait. Il a mis son chapeau sur sa tête. Et il est parti sous la pluie. Et moi, j'ai pris ma tête dans ma main. Et j'ai pleuré. Il a mis le café dans la tasse. Il a mis le lait dans la tasse de café. Il a mis le sucre dans le café au lait. Avec la petite cuillère, il a tourné. Il a bu le café au lait. Et il a reposé la tasse sans me parler. Il a allumé une cigarette. Il a fait le rond avec la fumée. Il a mis le centre dans le cendrier. Sans me parler, sans me regarder. Il s'est levé. Il a mis son manteau de pluie parce qu'il pleuvait. Il a mis son chapeau sur sa tête. Et il est parti sous la pluie. Sans une parole, sans me regarder. Et moi, j'ai pris ma tête dans ma main. Et j'ai pleuré. Il a mis le café dans la tasse. Il a mis le lait dans la tasse de café. Il a mis le sucre dans le café au lait. Avec la petite cuillère, il a tourné. Il a bu le café au lait et il a reposé la tasse sans me parler. Il a allumé une cigarette. Il a fait de ronds avec la fumée. Il a mis les cendres dans le cendrier, sans me parler, sans me regarder. Il s'est levé. Il a mis son manteau de pluie parce qu'il pleuvait. Il a mis son chapeau sur sa tête. Et il est parti sous la pluie. Et moi, j'ai pris ma tête dans ma main et j'ai pleuré.
Okay, that's done. So, which one has struck you the most emotionally?
I was really moved by the lighting in the second, but in the third one, the panning in and out in the moments of stillness was something.
Anybody else? Which one has struck you the most emotionally? Number two. So number two, for the number two. Number one. What kind of emotion? Emotionally. Okay. No, wow. You kidding? Hmm?
No, I mean,
Yeah, did you get the movie? It's a breakup? Emotionally, which movie, the movies that struck you the most emotionally, mention that? Which one made you feel more attracted to as the story of this couple? Or which one has given you the moment that this couple has really a problem?
Female gaze. The woman being at the helm, being the director of photography, makes that choice for me.
Yes, well, everybody else is, everybody, it's the most people chooses the second. That's the most emotionally and that it's more dramatic in terms of storytelling, the narrative.
Like
But someone-
it reveals the face of the protagonist, the male protagonist, towards the end, while he's in the shadow at first, there's a reveal. So there's a through light, there's a dramatic change. We concentrate on her because it's her scene.
Exactly. So that's all that in interviews that we did in a questionnaire. So they all has chosen the number two film also with the highest scores. Okay, for the emotional, like the negative reception of the film or the moment of the couple when we realize that there's a problem with the couple. Everyone chose the number two. The directors prefer the number three. Okay, the cinematographers prefer film number two, and number one. Some of people like better the number one because it's just focused on the characters, really close on them, but they disturbed with the camera work. With lots of whip pans and lots of shaking, they were just of that situation. So the methodology for this study is right here. The question, the hypothesis, the subject, the analysis, and inquiry, and the conclusions. And what the conclusions for this conference? It's about cinematography. When students come to school to learn cinematography, they are taught as a technical discipline, exclusively. How to use the equipment, how to do good exposure, how to use lenses, and and the students and the teachers are very keen on teaching technique. But there is also an artistic side of this that should be taught also in a philosophical way, because by using this movement, this light, this kind of framing, and it gives an emotional, gives emotions, gives a narrative, and has a contribution for the film that should be recognized and should be taught in schools, that cinematography is not only a technical discipline, but is also an artistic one. So this is the new different approach for the cinematography, because it's really a technique. We know that the students are very keen on technology. They want to toys to work with, but we should teach them something else beyond how to use the tool to tell a story, to come up with an artistic focus. And cinematography regarded as a technical discipline rather than the artistic. And then I just said, and so the references from my thesis are here from these books. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Next up, last but not least of our conference presentation in this track, is Manfred Becker from York University with probably quite a thought-provoking session on, we're titled even, a vaccine against fake news.
and I didn't fly in from Portugal. I almost took the bike across from
Yeah.
East Toronto, but then I looked at the weather and said, "Oh, we got them." I see a parallel to go from color on canvas to drawing with light to creating narratives through editing between the three presentations, and I already have questions about how you perceive and created your presentation. I'm here, this is, I think, my fourth conference in the last 2 months. I've been attending media literacy conferences in both Europe and in North America. And I looked at the programs, and what comes across is the element of story. There's one, storytelling for children, the neighborhood storyteller, storytelling in the community, the power of story, life story, narrative methods as a liberation tool, a literacy success story, sensational storytellers, flourish through storytelling. So I'm trying to take the opposite approach here and say story is a Trojan horse. I'm coming to warn you of story. It's not only used to make us buy stuff we don't need, it also sells ideology and false news and fake news, and stories are being used to kill. So I'm kind of the anti-story guy here, trying to point to what's wrong with contemporary society and shake up a little bit this idea of from hunter-gatherers to Plato's cave to the Hollywood dream factory, that story is the element which carries everything, which is about how we understand our relationship to the world, ourselves, our sense of history, etc. I personally think that narratives have become like viruses and are contagious, and I think we need to be aware of that. So that was me in the mid-1980s at the National Film Board of Canada, the guy in the back, of course. In front of me is Peter Watkins. Anybody heard of Peter Watkins? Filmmaker, made The War Game and then in the 1960s for the BBC, looking at the realistic consequences of a nuclear attack onto Britain. The BBC consequently found it a little too realistic for a documentary and banned it for 20 years. The film won an Academy Award. I was an impressionable student of film in Germany, and then learned that Peter Watkins was doing his follow-up film of The War Game in Toronto and Montreal at the National Film Board. So I basically abandoned my university studies and sat by the feet of my master, who had turned me on to film in the first place. So I advise every student to get out of university as soon as they can, if they find a way outside to be with a mentor who can guide them through the creative process. The War Game was 45 minutes long. The journey became 14.5 hours long, which was also a statement against how we measure time. And it's basically Peter Watkins' attack onto the way media is being created. He attacks what he calls the monoform, which is staccato editing, leaving the audience with the impression of being informed when they're actually not, and depriving them of agency, which points to not just a crisis in media creation, but also a crisis in society, that we have audiences and members of society who are no longer in control of affairs. So that what the film became, and Watkins pointed to film editors as one of the main culprits of that monoform, and I turned out to be one of those film editors for the next 20 years. I light the truth in cutting rooms of documentary film, and then moved on to become a director and a writer. In my own experience, I've experienced a kind of cross-pollination between what used to be these categories of legacy genres of what constitutes a documentary versus a drama versus an alternative or experimental film. They've become all intermeshed. There is kind of stories everywhere now, and I find this very problematic. I mean,
in fiction, it's all very easy. You make a story up, and it's you have a 3-act structure, and you have a second act curtain, and it takes us into a world. We willingly let ourselves into it. But with documentary, it's different. Documentaries are messy. They have 2 steps forwards, 3 steps back, and we cannot kind of put the straitjacket on the complexity of the real by giving it a story element. However, then I learned that's exactly what's being done. Here is, CMF is the Canadian Media Fund. You're being called in to give evaluations of hopeful sending in scripts and documentaries, and they give you a kind of cue sheet of what to go for. Here is one of them: theme, character, plot, structure, pace, stakes, originality, entertainment market. What do you think that's for documentaries or drama? That's what I thought too. It's for documentaries. So nowadays, documentaries are not measured by truth content and purpose and authenticity and ethics. It's whether you can entertain people. And that's the marketplace. So Bill Nichols, kind of the high priest of documentary film, says, "We hunger for news from the world around us with desire in form of narratives, stories that make meaning, however tenuous, dramatic, compelling, and paranoid there may be." He also came up with the concept of documentary being a discourse in sobriety, which I kind of grew up with. That was my upbringing of these are, it's like medicine. It tastes awful, but it's good for you, because it's important to shape you as a human being, as a citizen. But nowadays, it's all become this morass of entertainment. I was outed when I looked at my own practice. I was outed once by a lawyer who also taught at York University at the Osgood School of Law. When we did a documentary about sex trade for the National Film Board, we applied the same kind of technique of creating villains and heroes or heroines, and we turned him into the villain. And being a lawyer, he got a hold of course, he had a full transcript of his interview, and then he had somebody transcribe the dialogue in the film itself, the documentary, and then he looked at the difference and the changes, and then he wrote an open letter to the National Film Board saying, "What are you doing here? You're reducing the complexity of sex trade and bodies and gender relationships to this simple narrative of me being the male culprit." And he was right. And there are other sections, it's a 17-page letter where he points at me as the editor of having committed that. So that was my own inciting incident to look further into what my role is in factual reporting and documentary film. So for my dissertation, I talked to 75 picture editors in the US, Canada, and Germany. I asked them about their relationship to program participants, producers, audiences, true storytelling, the level of media literacy they assume with their audiences. Should the art of the invisible be transparent? Good example, like I invite you to ask anybody around your family who isn't working in the media and ask them what a cutaway is. Can somebody explain what a cutaway is? Take a wild guess. What's a cutaway?
Cutaway just cuts or something else away from the scene.
Yeah, I mean, the cutaway is then it returns to the previous image. So the simple example is I interview you and you speak, you give a presentation, and then suddenly you see me kind of nodding, holding the microphone, and then it cuts back to you. Well, why do people need to know who's interviewing? No, they don't. They show me because of what? Because they've taken one section of your interview and spliced it together. And if you were to not have an image over it, your head would jump. So they put a cutaway over it, which sounds innocent enough because that's what media is and how it's being created, except that it kind of hides the first lie in media creation, which is the collapse of time. It pretends to have a continuity when there is none. And that sounds innocent enough again, but to understand that very simple concept is complex and speaks about the way how movies are being created. and how media is being created. And I'm moving off legacy media here into social media. So that was an element which I asked the colleagues of who were working in either factual programming, unfortunately called nonfiction. How do you define a genre by what it isn't? But that's what it's called, nonfiction. And then I asked them, so when you work as an editor, who are you loyal to? The director, producer, audience, the story, broadcaster, participants themselves, like what else? What do you think came out on top? These are factual programming editors. Like a wild guess.
Broadcasters.
One would think, because they pay the bills. One would wish, because it's about media literacy. Yeah, story.
Themselves.
Yeah, you'd think 75. Yeah, some did, but the majority said, I serve the story. And then I would say, what story? Like it's reality. It's messy. It's one step forward, two steps back. And they say no. By the end, it has to have a 3-act structure. It has to have a reveal, whatever it is. We are reducing the complexity of real life into that narrative. I talked about ethics in the cutting room. Where do you draw the line? Where would you not perform an edit? And of course, those who work in reality shows had lots of things to tell me about how they were forced to do things they didn't want to do. But ironically, no one ever got fired or walked off the job for refusing to producers or broadcasters' decision. They're considered unethical, which for me was a key realization. That fear about you're just a little cog in the web and you have to work what the broadcaster or the producer demands of you. No, if you say, I will not do this because this ain't right, that might take you off the show, but nobody ever got fired of the 75 I talked to. So that talks to me about responsibility as a media creator. That is called a Frankenbite. Anybody heard that term before? Etymology, Frankenstein, and soundbite. So let's say Big Brother reality show, Steve and Laura live together, they get along fine. That's nice for Steve and Laura, but that makes for boring television. So the producer says to the editor, get to work. So what do they do here? They flip 2 words, right? They flip Steve and that, and suddenly the meaning changes with it. And suddenly we have drama where there was none before, and that's entertainment, and that's why people will turn in the next week, and that's why advertisers will buy the block of ads, because what will happen to Steve and Laura next week? I said to myself, well, that's reality show, and I'm dealing with the discourse of sobriety, so documentary, that ain't me. And then I looked at my own practice and I realized how I had violated those principles of ethical behavior in the cutting room myself. A quick example, I did a piece with Daniel Liebeskind, the architect who did the ROM here, the Royal Ontario Museum, the crystal. And I asked about his creative inspirations, and he used a lot of books. And I said, oh, isn't that interesting? The word made stone. Isn't that how you would describe your own work? And he would say, yeah, it's something like that. And then in the cutting room, I thought, why wouldn't you just repeat that line? The word made stone. I was kind of pretty happy about myself having come up with that metaphor, and you wouldn't get into it. And then I got more and more suspicious, because I almost did a Frankenbite using another term he used in order to replace the something, because something is nothing. And I found the quote, the word made stone, and was by Albert Speer, who was Hitler's Minister of Armament in architecture. And Daniel Liebeskind is the child of Holocaust survivors. So the road to hell is paved with good intention. I tried to make him sound poetic and rich and beautiful, and I would have fallen into that trap. Luckily, it never saw the light of day because I never found funding. Who wants to make a film about an architect? So this is how the Frankenbite penetrates every area of media creation now. And so I went a little further, trying to understand story and the importance of story nowadays. Christian Salmon, a professor at the Sorbonne in France, has written about it. A beautiful book, Bewitching the Modern Mind. And I looked at again, the etymology. In the beginning, there used to be story, and story is defined as a series of causal chronological events in which a character is tested through conflict. And then there were news, newly received or noteworthy information on important events meant to make people aware of their surroundings, other people, and events taking place, which is fine. There's a delineation and a separation between story and news, but now everything is a news story. When did that happen? And so it came really in the resurgence of the penny press, where news got commercialized, where things were dumbed down in order to bring it to a broader possible audience in order to sell them. So this is how it started before there were actually even moving images, is entertainment and factual content was mixed. So there's a history to that. So you can't just blame the filmmakers, because it's been happening ever since there has been human expression in a printed or written form. I now go into high schools, and I have a external researcher status with the Toronto District School Board, where I talk to media literacy students about the power of story. And here is one where this young girl, some of us are old enough. Does anybody remember this face? It's a young woman who spoke at a US congressional hearing in 1991 after Iraq had entered Kuwait. The Americans, because of their economic interest and because it spells oil, were going to go in there with their military force to liberate Kuwaiti citizens from the invaders. But the American public had no appetite. There was clearly no support for the US president, until this woman suddenly appeared on all three major networks. And she describes in this clip how she saw, as a volunteer in a Kuwaiti hospital, that Iraqi soldiers had come into the maternity ward, taking the newborn babies out of incubators, placed them on the concrete floor to take the incubators back to Baghdad themselves. Made a huge impact. President Bush Sr. used it in his speech 5 times that night. The next day, the surveys, the polling was a complete reverse. The American public supported the war. Schwarzkopf started his Operation Desert Storm. A couple of weeks afterwards, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people died. We still don't know how many died because they were just buried in the sand. And a few years after that, it was revealed that that woman wasn't a nurse at all, as she had claimed to be. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the States. And the story had been created by Hill & Knowlton, which is one of the major public relations firms, in order to sway the US public to come on side. So story was responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people. And you can extend that into any area of history. Now we have, that was Frankenbiting. Now we have AI and VR and the metaverse. And I don't know if you've seen that image. He was awarded the competition creative Sony World Photography Awards. And then he made a public statement just the other week saying, oh, sorry, I can't take it because it's an AI creation. So the picture might be saying more than 1,000 words, but you cannot trust anything anymore. So we live in a world where everything has been suspended. How do we deal with the next generation of media consumers who are also creators, being our students? So I created this unit going into high schools. I'm not going to go through all the details here because we are running out of time, but I'm doing 3 sessions with students where I introduce the whole idea. I talk about certain principles of editing, the Kuleshov effect. You can look it up. We talked about the cutaway, the Frankenbite, how chronology is being shifted, image manipulation, the archetype in the story, like why are nature dogs full of heroes and villains? It's nature. But there is the bad wolf who's going to eat the little deer, and you show students, I show them a scene, and then I cut it off just before it comes to a conclusion, and I say, so what do you think now? And most of them are ticked off because I don't show them the ending. And I thought, yeah, that's the power of story. So there's the Frankenbite again. I make the students perform Frankenbites on the page. And also show them a series of 5 photos, rather than one of the appeals the teachers make is to get off the screen, because students are spending way too much time on it. And so you can lay out 6 images, and I do breakout groups, and I give them the same set of images, and I say, okay, create a story. And then they have 5 minutes, and then I have them walk me through the story, or walk all of us through the story. And there's yet to be an example where I'm in the same classroom and people come up with the same story. They're all ordered differently, which is a celebration of the human creativity, but it also shows that 5 images basically is a movie, which is about creating narratives. And that's one of the key principles. What I'm trying to get through is going into high schools and talking about somebody who has been that culprit of media manipulation, and basically unveiling the curtain and revealing what elements are at play, and be empowering the students, because then they go off and create their own short film and build something on their phones. Like nowadays, the smartphone, you can write with it, you can shoot with it, better images, 4K than most cameras I own. You can edit on it very simply, and you can hit a button and it's on your favorite social media site. So media consumers are now creators. So it doubles up the responsibility in terms of not just reading media, but creating it. And we talk about that, and the response I've been receiving is quite overwhelming, because I tell them, I say, look, create something outrageous, create something where you can turn your school into a horror house, your favorite movie star into a creepy character. Use it through the editing we've talked about, and they do it, and they know. And I recall my own experience when I discovered editing as a way to make a living and create art, is that empowerment you feel in that very moment. With that comes responsibility. So it's all about the responsibility as a media creator and consumer to assume, so you are protected from that virus, and one of those viruses is story. And then we have a kind of mini film festival where they show all their work, and we discuss it and decipher it, and we give out awards at the end. So it's much fun. Yeah, so decipher it. And then I do a survey before and after, watching videos. What factors do you pay attention to? There we go, the students as well. The story is key. I talk to the teachers, how comfortable they are teaching media literacy. There's definitely a deficit, and it's now been 10 schools, close to 20 teachers, and more than 200 students. So it's becoming substantial. And then afterwards, I go back to the students and say, what do you think now? And suddenly thinking about how videos are being created has doubled. So there is a measurable effect, and thanks to Google, who do these beautiful pie charts without you lifting a finger. So, and it's anonymous and completely confidential. So there are the differences between before and after. And it's over. So that's what I'm doing right now, and the goal is to make this a permanent a unit for media educators to use. Right now, there's a toss between staying on the web, and I've heard enough teachers who are way overworked and way too busy to get themselves into another software they are not interested in. They want a body in the room. So I'm trying to build a database with my colleagues because I have enough industry contacts after having been there for 40 years that I can train colleagues to go in there and do that dog and pony show so they can relate to a human being and walk away with knowledge how media is created so they can talk to their peers and their families about it. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Manfred.
Yeah.